Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Gentreo podcast. As always, I am your host, Jacob Murphy, and joining me today is Sharon O'Connor. Sharon is a developmental psychologist and management consultant who has spent her career working with individuals and organizations to help them overcome challenges and become more productive. Her work is grounded in positive psychology, which is the science of helping people thrive. She's here today talking with me to share her expertise on how to think through the mental challenges of estate planning and offer some practical suggestions on how to overcome some of those challenges. Sharon, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So why don't you give us a little bit of insight as to how you ended up being a psychologist, just for our audience?
Well, I'm fascinated by people's stories, and I love helping people overcome challenges so they can be their best selves. And it's just, I've been in this field now for almost 30 years, and I love it. And I'm so happy to share with you my expertise in helping people overcome challenges so that they can, make decisions that are in their best interests.
And have you always been a psychologist, like right out of school? Was that immediately what you got into? Or is that...
That's what I did. Okay. That's what I did. Although school is expensive, so I had to work full time and then do my program at night. So it took a little while. It took me about 8 years start to finish in the doctoral program. But once I got out, I was able to, use it right away.
Mm-hmm. And, I'm excited to talk to you today because I feel like what you do, and specifically, the areas of psychology that you are interested in, I feel like they mesh really well with a lot of the issues we've had at Gentreo. So I let me start by asking, how is it that you came across Gentreo? How did you learn about us?
Well, I learned about Gentreo from someone who you're close with, which is your mom, Beth Lindstrom, and your dad, Ray Murphy. And so that's how I learned.
Both of whom have been on the podcast before. So if any of our listeners want to learn more about those two individuals, we have episodes with them in the past.
Yep. So that's how I learned about Gentreo. And
okay. So, for me, at least, when I think about the intersection between psychology and what we do at Gentreo, a lot of it comes with that hesitation, sometimes that difficulty having the difficult conversations that come with estate planning. So, can you describe from your, professional point of view, what those fears and anxieties are that might come with estate planning?
Well, as I was thinking about our conversation today, I was thinking about like two buckets of challenges that you would have around estate planning, particularly challenges that sort of fall in the logical bucket and challenges that fall in the psychological bucket. And so, and all of these have a psychological flavor to them, even if they're logical. So, for instance, a logical challenge that you have when getting someone to sign up with estate planning might be having them understand the cost savings of doing estate planning versus not doing estate planning. And that, that you can address by using logic. Another kind of challenge might be a time challenge. Folks don't want to take the time to do it. And you can, explain to them, educate them as to why it's a time savings for them. If they put in a little bit of time, they can get save a lot of time for their loved ones. And that's a particularly compelling one because it is intensely time consuming for your loved ones to deal with, someone's estate if you don't do any sort of estate planning. And the third sort of logical challenge that you can address is simply lack of knowledge about the whole process. So, and that I would approach just through a simple education, educating folks onto what the process is. And when people are, when people don't understand what estate planning is, the tendency may be to provide too much detail in terms of education. And really the strategy around that would be to simplify it down to its basic elements so that people can grasp it easily. So when I was thinking about this, I thought, oh, well, you can approach cost, time, and education with, logic, right? And even though those are still challenges, at least you have a logical approach to meeting those challenges. The more difficult ones, the trickier ones to deal with are really the psychological challenges, and they're significant because we're talking about dealing with the issue of death, and that is something that folks don't want to think about.
Mm-hmm. I think, obviously I'm not an expert, but I think there's also that fear of the unknown, which I think that all kind of stems. The fear of the unknown is that human fear of death as well, because the unknown kind of is almost like a miniature version of that fear of death. Am I correct there?
Exactly. Yep. We don't know what's going to happen. And so if we don't talk about it, then we don't have to think about it, and then we don't have to, deal with it. And
I've noticed that. So when it comes to these big life decisions, I almost find that people tend to stray away more from dealing with something that is, more important than they would, smaller choices in life that don't carry as much weight. For example, with Gentreo, we're talking about, what happens after you die in the case of a will, or, for the other documents that affect you while you're living. There's still that mentality that something crucial would have to happen to you for those documents to be necessary. I found the same thing was true when I worked in the financial industry with insurance and, life insurance, that kind of thing. It's a really important thing to have, but it almost felt like there was a relationship between how important something is and how much more likely people are to put it off. And I wonder if there's like
there is
psychological reason for
that. So there's even though it's very important way out in the future in our minds, right? Mm-hmm. So people it's much more, they're much more willing to invest their time and energy and money into something that is more immediate. We're very immediate focused. And so what...
You mean like that sense of instant gratification?
Yes. We're much more focused on something immediate. And so to bring this issue of estate planning into their immediate consciousness by aligning it with something that they value deeply. So for instance, if you value taking care of your family, and that's something that is a high priority for you, reminding them about that being something that is very important to them. And, if I were having a conversation with someone about, the importance of estate planning, I probably wouldn't start with estate planning. I would start with what they value, and hoping that they, if they mention something around family, talk to them about how they express valuing their family. Like, what are the kind of behaviors that they exhibit that shows that they're valuing their family, and then adding on estate planning to something that they've already kind of doing, which is behaviors that demonstrate how we value our family. Do you know what I'm saying? So you're linking the behavior of estate planning to something that they're already doing. So say like valuing your family is demonstrated by, hosting holidays. So that's that's kind of a family event. So you would talk to someone about how, this kind of thing is very important to you. Estate planning is just one more of those things. So you take it away from the whole death scenario and link it more towards their own value of valuing their family.
Okay.
Do you understand?
Yeah, I
the
know we've
pivot.
talked a little bit about this before this recording too, but we're talking about taking the mental focus of getting your estate planning done off of your own mortality,
Yes,
and instead making it, almost spinning it in a positive fashion to, it's something you do to care about your family, to show you care about your family, and to
exactly.
make sure they're protected. So you're talking about associating the need to get this done with more positive things
Caring
in
for
your
your
life
family.
versus,
If someone articulates that they're a person who cares for their family, then that's an easier, and that's a value that they have and they express. I know that you also, I was going through your website and I didn't know this, but I saw that you have this around pets, right? You have the
yeah.
same estate planning for pets. And so people deeply care about their pets, and they bring them to the vets and they do all these wonderful things for their pets. I think if you link it to this value of caring for them, it's just one more behavior for caring for them rather than, linking it or it's in any way to your own demise. It's
Mhm.
easier to do. You can get over that psychological hurdle
Well,
because
it's
thinking about
interesting
your own
too that
demise is too hard.
yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up because our pet products are actually one of the most popular aspects of Gentreo. And I wonder if that's because it's not directly focused on the individual. Like, because it's, if I was to go into Gentreo and make a pet power of attorney, I'm not doing something for me. I'm doing something for my pet who I deeply care about.
Right.
And it kind of adds that layer of separation. So it's no longer my own mortality. It's I'm doing something for someone else or my pet that I care about deeply. And,
That's what I'm
there are
saying you got to do
circumstances.
for
Yeah.
people, right? I mean, the same exact dynamic has to happen for your loved ones.
I imagine that's where we run into the issue though, is because, if you're dealing with an aging parent, there are circumstances where you can come into Gentro and essentially make documents on behalf of someone else. But the majority of the time, people are coming in to make their own documents.
Oh, I see.
There's, legally speaking, people have to make their own documents. So how do you think we get by that hurdle? I mean, we've already
Well,
suggested the mental focus being on something positive versus negative, but the
well,
individual does have to make their own documents and eventually face that
there's
difficult
well,
choice.
it's kind of interesting to talk about, the concept of procrastination.
Mm-hmm.
And how that plays into this decision around doing, your estate planning. So people think of procrastination as actually a problem, but for our psyches, procrastination is a solution. Okay?
Really?
Yes. Let me tell you a little bit about that. So we procrastinate. That our psyches consider procrastination a solution to something that we do not want to do. Okay? And these kinds of things, these kinds of problems that our psyche is protecting us from, it's actually a protective mechanism, is something we want to avoid, we don't want to deal with, something that might overwhelm us, or something that might elicit a fear of failure. So our psyche is protecting us from having to experience that. And that's why it procrastinates. So a
Okay.
way, isn't that interesting? So
It's
it's
interesting.
actually a
I mean,
solution. Our psyche thinks of procrastination as a solution to something.
I completely understand that, and I'm still left with, we have the statistic that roughly 80% of the American population does not have at least a complete estate plan done. They might have bits and pieces, but as a whole, 80% of the population doesn't have
Mm-hmm.
that full estate plan created, which you need to have to protect yourself. So, while I understand, I've lived that. I think we all procrastinate. I definitely
Mm-hmm.
had that problem, back in school, not getting things done, pushing off to the last minute. So how do we get around that? I think
So,
it's a positive thing to view it as that mental protection and
mm-hmm.
understand it better, but it still leaves the necessity to, get things done,
So
which
once we
sometimes just doesn't happen.
understand that it is it's an effort by our psyche to protect us. It's an effort for our psyche to protect us from something it doesn't feel safe to do. So you don't want to beat yourself up for procrastinating, number one, because you're beating that is not the strategy here. No one ever changes by beating themselves up. That does not work. What works is to understand what are you trying to protect me from, and then how can I make myself safe from that so that you no longer have to protect me from that. Okay, so let me give you an example. Avoidance is a common, so we procrastinate because we want to avoid a difficult conversation, right? The difficult conversation may be, I'm thinking around estate planning. I'm in a blended family. I have stepchildren. I have my own biological children, and I have decided that I want to only pass down parts of my estate to my biological children. Having that conversation with my spouse is going to be difficult, so I avoid doing it, right? So one of the ways to get around this psychologically is to talk about what is the downside of avoiding this and what is the upside of avoiding this. Make that conscious, make that clear, not pretend like it doesn't exist, which is the strategy of procrastination, but to instead have a conversation with yourself or with your spouse. What is the upside of avoiding this? The upside is I don't have to have a difficult conversation. And then also making clear the downside of avoiding this is that something could happen, and then the things that we care about passing down, those kinds of things don't, we don't pass them down to the people that we want them to be passed down to. Do you understand what I'm saying about having this?
Yeah, I mean,
the solution to it
that
is asking the question, what's the upside of avoiding it and what's the downside? And when the downside of avoiding it becomes greater than the upside of avoiding it, then you're more likely to discard the procrastination strategy and actually move forward and do it. So you have to help people. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was saying I agree with that completely, and we talk about that a lot. In a big part of what Gentreo is about education, because I say this phrase in almost every single podcast. A lot of people do view our industry as a bit of a black box, where there's just a lack of education there, and I think education does help quite a bit, and we do harp down pretty heavily on the fact that if you don't get it done, your choices are out of your hands. Your kids might be given to whoever is to you.
Yes.
Your kids might be given to someone who you didn't want to have them. Your house, your assets, your healthcare choices are in someone else's hands. So a lot of negative that can easily be avoided by going through this process. And I think that a lot of people do manage to get around those by shifting the narrative to a more positive focus, saying, because I've done this now, I know my kids are protected with my choices in mind. But I not to play devil's advocate, but I do think at the end of the day, it does still come back to that, this is going to take effect after I passed away, and there's really no way to get past that. So how do you think people, I don't want to say spin death into like a positive thing, but how do, at the end of the day, that mortality aspect is still there.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering.
It's always going to be there. It is always going to be there. So, and you can't spin it in any positive way. So you have to say, yeah, that exists, and that's a barrier that we have to deal with. But what may be more compelling for folks is their care for the people that they love, and making sure that that's front and center in their consciousness, that this is a strategy for caring for people that you love. This is a strategy for caring for a pet. This is a strategy for caring for people that you love. And if you're a caring parent, if you're a loving, spouse, this is part of that. This is what you do when you're a caring parent.
Mm-hmm.
You save for college. Saying, these
basically make it bigger than just you.
Yes. This is not about you. This is about caring for your, but it's a challenge that you definitely have, because folks, if they don't want to think about death, they try not to. So it has to be not about your death, but has to be about caring for the people that you love. That has to be front and center. And
in my mind, I've always broken it down in almost two different buckets, like you said, where there's for your individual self dealing with the facet of death. We like to talk about legacy more. And, for the individual, it's what is my legacy going to be? Because that's almost like your life after your life. What are you, who are you going to be remembered as? And that can very easily be looked at in a positive way. And then I think, like you said, for the rest of it, it has to be looked at something bigger than you. It has to be looked at as, what am I leaving behind to everyone else? How am I protecting everyone else who is still going to be there? And how do I use these tools to benefit and make things as easy as possible for everyone else?
Right. Well, there's another thing, besides just avoiding difficult conversations, why people procrastinate. And you can, there's solutions to this one too. So people procrastinate when they feel overwhelmed. Okay. They have too much to do right now. They can't add another thing to their plate. They have no bandwidth for thinking about this. So when people feel overwhelmed, I have no bandwidth to deal with this now. I'll deal with it next year. The strategy for overcoming overwhelm is to break the steps to getting this done into the tiniest parts that they can be successful for. Okay? You have to allow people to do one tiny micro little thing. For instance, just signing up for your newsletter. That's an easy thing to do, right? That they just have to put their email in. That they can do. And then that's a first start. That's a start. Just sign up for the newsletter. And if they are so overwhelmed with life, with whatever's going on with life, and the stuff that you offer them feels like more overwhelmed, they're not going to do it. But if it's a micro stuff that's going to make them feel better because they're going to begin to take care of their family, but it's not going to be right this minute when I'm, taking care of my mother in hospice or whatever else that you have going on that's making you feel overwhelmed.
It's baby steps.
Yeah, that micro baby steps. And here's the key. The baby step, they have to be able to be successful at doing the baby step. Because if they feel like they can't be successful doing the baby step, they're going to associate failure with the entire thing.
And I do think that that's one of the things that we've done pretty well at Gentreo. Maybe we could even break it down even more to be even more helpful. But, the old way of doing estate planning was you would go talk to a lawyer and have that, those sessions.
Right.
Where those can, I imagine, be very overwhelming because you're trying to get everything done as quick as possible to, save on that billing time. Whereas, our platform, we've allowed people to, you could start a will, you could do the first question because it's all, question-based questionnaire style. You could do the first question, save it, pause it, come back to it, a week later if you need to.
That's even just filling out their name on the will. Right?
Yeah,
even just filling out their name on the will feels like a first step. And if they know, all you have to do is fill out your name and then set it aside. You've got it started, and you can come back to it when you have a little more bandwidth. That will feel doable for people, and you've got people started. Once you get them started, it's easier to, the way I think about it is like when you're sledding on a hill. If you can, just give people that little push, then their sled can keep going. going down the hill.
Yeah, the
Sometimes you
momentum
need
starts to
someone
carry.
to help you push the sled down the hill at the very beginning, but once you got that sled rolling, they have momentum and they can do it. But
Yeah.
getting, over that little inertia at the beginning, it has to be so micro and small that they feel some success around it. So even just putting their name at the top of the wheel is going to feel good to folks, even if they haven't completed it. But they're making that commitment that eventually they're going to do this.
Yeah, maybe it's just because of the nice weather out, but I'm thinking about the example of, everyone always hesitates to dive into the water. It's always that first jump in
Mm-hmm.
that's hard. But then once you're in, then the whole day is kind of gets going.
It's exactly that. But getting in that first,
Yeah.
especially if it's been a little cold.
You count
There's
to three over and over
right.
again. It's hard to make the first jump.
So there's one other thing around procrastination that I wanted to share with you that is something that can definitely be overcome, but people may not be aware of it, or you guys probably are aware of it and are addressing it, but I just wanted to raise that, is that people procrastinate because of a fear of failure. And we procrastinate because we feel that we're going to be judged not good enough. And how does that apply to this, right? Well, I happen to know that I have a little personally, and you witnessed this morning, a little bit of technology phobia. Okay. I was worried that I wasn't going to be able to link into this podcast. And so I asked you for instruction, and you were very patient with me, getting me linked into the podcast and everything. And I'm someone who uses technology every day. Okay. So older folks resist technology for this reason, because they don't think they're going to be good at it. And you have a technology platform.
Yeah.
So you held my hand through the process of me joining this podcast on an app that I didn't have. You held my hand through this process, and now here we are conversing and recording a podcast. But I'm not alone in being worried about using technology. And people will procrastinate because they think they're not going to be able to overcome the technology barrier, because they don't want to feel badly about not being successful at it. So this is another reason people procrastinate, but they're not going to tell you that because they don't want to be seen as unintelligent. They don't want to be seen as, frail and old and not with it. So I know that is a reason people procrastinate doing things with technology, because they're afraid of being judged either by others or themselves as not being good enough, not being smart enough to be able to do it. So
yeah, I completely agree. I think there's like so many different thoughts just popped in my mind off of that. I mean, first off, like with Gentreo, with the platform, we understand that it's technology based, and we have the coaches who we allow people to sign up with to kind of walk them through it, like not to receive legal advice, because we're not a law firm, but just to help get over the hump of maybe not being so technologically sound. And that's really the struggle that we face sometimes, because to drag the industry of estate planning, which is the traditional way feels really outdated, to drag that into the 21st century. Technology had to get involved, but at the same time you then deal with that issue of people who may not be as skilled with
technology savvy. Yep. It's
exactly, yeah.
it's a real issue.
That made me, yeah, it is. Another aspect it made me think of too is, with technology, it takes a lot of the tangibility out of it. And I think that might also be a holdup for some people. And I'd love to get your thoughts on it. But, it was the same thing, like I said earlier, with insurance. It's the same thing with Gentreo having everything stored in the cloud. You don't have, when you think about making your will, you think about holding that physical piece of paper. And when you take that tangibility out of it, I wonder if that causes some people to struggle with, adding that importance to something that's not tangible might be
I
wrong
understand
for some
exactly
people.
what you're saying. That it's out there in this amorphous cloud, and it's not in my hand. Yeah, I do think that's
even
a
though
barrier.
it's a real important legal document that can be used. You could print it out and bring it to court, and it would solve
Right.
a whole bunch of issues that you could encounter in, say, probate. But the fact that you don't
It
have
exists
that
in the
physical way
cloud.
most of the time, it almost feels like it's conceptual, even though theoretically it is still a tangible asset that can be used, a tool that can be used.
I think you're right. But so long as folks have the ability to print it, if, after they fill it out online, and, we've printed enough, we filled out enough things online now that we know that, all right, you just click on the PDF and it prints. But I think that, I think that is an issue for a certain population of us. I still print out tickets from Ticketmaster to go to events. Right. So it's a generational thing for sure.
I'm younger, and even I'm in my mid-20s, and even I, going to the airport, I struggle to conceptually to think that my ticket is valid because it's on my phone,
right?
Versus printing it physically out and handing it to someone and saying, "This is my
same
ticket to
same
fly."
sort of thing.
So, like, even for you, it is an understandable concept. And I should also clarify, I don't think that everything we're talking about is like 100% across the board. So I think that some people might not struggle with that as much as others. And I think it is true that it is probably generational. But like I just said, like I, being a younger person, still have some of those issues.
Thoughts
and I'm
when
sure
you're
there's
doing
older people who are technological wizards, and they're probably fine with it. So,
Well, it's
I do.
it's
Sorry,
hard. Go ahead, Jake.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna switch, not switch topics, but kind of revisit something a little bit. One conversation that I wanted to have is, we've talked a little bit about how the individual can cope with some of these mental blocks when it comes to, procrastinating or hesitations on getting started, all of that. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about the psychology of getting the whole family involved. I found, just in my experience working for Gentreo, that having the conversations with your family and getting them involved tends to lead to a lot less family strife in the aftermath. The horror stories that we hear about families that are torn apart because there was no communication and no one knew who was getting what, and they didn't have the conversation so everyone was prepared and kind of ready for how things would play out. It really is hard to hear sometimes. And I'm wondering, because it does require to have these difficult conversations, what's going to happen to all of Dad's assets after he passes away or something. Like, that's a hard conversation to have with yourself, much less with your siblings, with your parents while they're still alive. So, but I think the upsides of everyone being on the same page beforehand they outweigh the comfort of not having the conversation and being comfortable and then being in a panic when it does happen. So how do you think families can get around the mental challenges of initiating conversation with each other
Around
to
it,
all be on that same page?
It's again framing it as, I want this. This is what I'm doing to take care of. Aligning it with the value of taking care of your family, right? And so the children are not the ones who should be initiating this conversation, and it's impossible for the children to do that, successfully. It really needs to be the parents saying, I want it. This is my way of taking care of you, just like I've done in the past with these other kinds of behaviors that I've done. I want to have this. The parents need to initiate it. So if there is strife in the family system, there's no getting around this. Okay? Mm-hmm. You're going to be able to get some families to discuss this, but because estate planning reveals a lot of underlying conflict that's going on in the family, because it's just is what it is. If there's an underlying conflict, then people are going to avoid this. But if there are families that are willing to, have this conversation, it's going to have to be rooted in the fact that this is our way of taking care of you, and this is our thinking, and we'd like to hear your thoughts. I would have the conversation that way, but understand that this is something that I would probably, for most families, have in the presence of a therapist, because it is really difficult, and there is so much underlying conflict and strife and psychological and emotional landmines, that it would be really, really helpful to have a skilled therapist guide folks through this conversation, because
and I think,
it's hard.
I think we're kind of talking in the scenario that the family is experiencing some strife. I'm sure that there are families who, they might be that picture perfect family, and
there's none of those, Jake. There's none of those. That's fantasy.
I mean, I guess picture perfect is a poor choice, poor term, but I guess what I'm saying is there's definitely a spectrum of, how easily it is to talk to your family members, and hopefully, I guess I'm being optimistic and saying hopefully there's families out there that could, initiate these conversations easier, because they do have that level of trust and comfort. But I do understand what you're saying. I think regardless of how good your family is, these conversations are hard to have. And
Exactly.
I've never actually thought about the idea of having a professional there to help facilitate progress with these conversations.
Yeah, I think it would be so helpful, because it's a hard conversation to have anyway.
Yeah.
And to have someone who is skilled at, facilitating high conflict kind of conversations, the result could be that you're able to really move through these difficult conversations with much more ease, rather than avoiding them or procrastinating them. It's something that, I was thinking about when I was preparing to, share my thoughts with you today. I was thinking that these are really difficult conversations, and having a skilled professional help folks through it wouldn't be a bad thing.
Yeah, and I think, we've talked about a lot of good solutions to getting over some of these humps, and not to kind of dampen the mood, but I do think at the end of the day, these are hard conversations to have regardless of how well you can cope with them. But I think that they're just so incredibly important to have. And I brought up the family dynamic because I think it's so crucial to have the conversations with everyone, not just yourself, because, at the end of the day, this is something that people have to do on an individual level. But I think if you can spin it into as positive of a thing as possible and get everyone on the same page, that puts you in the best position possible to have what, I think it's impossible to have a perfect plan in place, but I think to have as close as possible to a perfect plan, that's the route that families should attempt to take is
as best they can.
Page, everyone be comfortable and happy with what they think their plan is going to be, but then the individual has to take the initiative to get their portion of it done, so everyone has to have their own will. Everyone needs to know who's each other's healthcare proxy and share those documents. I'm trying not to make this come across as a shameless plug, but I think that Gentreo has put together those kind of tools, and now it's just getting people to want to do it.
Yep.
And take as much of that stress out of it.
Well, hopefully I've given a couple of suggestions that make it a micro bit easier, but it's hard, but it's the people that do it seem to feel much more. I mean, the result is you're feeling relaxed because your family's taken care of.
I mean, I've gone through this firsthand in terms of having these. I've already, obviously, how could I not? Because I work in this industry, but I've had these difficult conversations with my parents and with my brothers and with my family, outside of that immediate 5. That's, my 2 brothers, I, and my parents. And it, like, to be frank, it sucks. It sucks to talk about it.
Yes, it
But I
does.
feel so much more comfortable knowing that we're all on the same page, and that we have a plan in place. And if, God forbid, I get hit by a bus tomorrow somehow, living in the middle of the woods,
Right.
I know that, my father can come to the hospital and can have a document and say, look at this. I know what he wants. These are his wishes. I'm
Yep.
his healthcare proxy.
Yep.
We don't have to go to court and spend hours of time and countless dollars to get this figured out. And
Right.
it sucked to have the conversation, but the peace of mind is 100% worth
Just
it.
priceless. It really is.
It is priceless. Yeah. So we've listed out a lot of good strategies today. I really like that we kind of broke it down by the logic side of things, which do have their own speed bumps. I think
Yep.
the cost, the time, the education, I think those speed bumps there, but since it's all based in that kind of rational side of things, I think those are easier to overcome. Like,
yes.
And then we have the psychological side of things, which I can't express how nice it is to hear an expert like you put it into words.
Well, I think you have a great product there, Jake. And I think, hopefully I could add a little bit.
I think so too. It's just,
I hope I have added a little bit of my expertise to help you guys, share it with the world.
So I like to, as we wrap things up, I always like to give the guests an opportunity to get, I don't want to call it philosophical, but maybe extend their knowledge out a little further beyond just Gentreo and the estate planning topic. So I'd love to ask you before we wrap up, as a professional psychologist, is there any this might be even too broad, but any just generic life advice that's been on your mind lately in your practice that you'd like to share with us? It could be estate planning related or not.
Oh, wow.
I know. Big question. I gotta imagine that general life advice from a psychologist could probably lead to a whole nother
a long conversation. But what I do in my work is that I try and focus, and this is the life advice that I would share with anyone, is focus on your own strengths, focus on the strengths of other people, and that's what, and pay attention to those, and focus your energy and your consciousness on the strengths that you have versus focusing on, all the ways in which you don't line up or you're not successful, because it's not, beating ourselves up never gets us anywhere. It's when we understand and focus on our strengths that we're able to move forward. And that is a life lesson that I am constantly teaching my clients and everyone I know and love. We're all about our strengths, not about the ways in which we fall down and don't measure up. So I don't know if that has anything to do with your podcast, but that's my life philosophy.
Fantastic advice that's applicable to every facet of life, regardless
that's how I live.
Estate planning related or not. Sharon, thank you so much for coming on and helping us unpack this difficult topic a little more. I'm really excited to have this episode up, and maybe as we grow Gentreo a little more and get a little bigger and find out more ways that we can help people and make this process even easier, we can have you come back on and we can talk about it even more. And
absolutely, Jake, I'm happy to.
And, yeah, I think that'd be fantastic. Well, I appreciate you coming on. Look forward to talking again soon.
Okay, talk to you later, Jake. Thanks so much for having me.